Pleased to be joined by former state controller in California, Betty Yee, and somebody who is more timely than me as far as getting to the station today. I think that maybe has to do with your message about accountability, is getting here first and getting here to do business.
Right, I try to always be on time. So
perfect, even more so than on time. We appreciate you coming down. Well, you're in Bakersfield today. How important is your message to reaching out to people across the state? I know that you had been up in Sacramento. You're originally from the Bay Area. What about the Central Valley is important for your part of your campaign?
Well, I think it's very important. Look, we have a very diverse state, and it all works because of the diversity of our economy, the diversity of our people, and I do believe that we have just immense human talent in the state, and I would like to think that once we harness that any challenge that we face here in California can be solved right here in California.
One of the interesting things that we're seeing right now as it goes to ag in Central Valley are tariffs, and the potential that some crops that can be grown in the Central Valley could be tariffed again or have a tariff put on it, as they were actually back in 2018 during a previous 2019 during a previous trade war. How would you go about trying to solve tariffs? Would you pursue this the plan that Governor Newsom has, which is try to have separate tariffs or a separate trade plan?
Well, I applaud Governor Newsom. Look, we look at California, and as he finally likes to refer California as a nation state, I think this is probably the time to step up and act like one, right? And so we are open for business. We actually, I think, can have our own global relationships with our diverse industries. And so in so many ways, I think, when we look at the tariff policies today, I mean, obviously they're being exacted for as a blunt instrument in terms of just trying to get particular outcomes from this administration, but we're all going to feel the pain of that. And I think the way that we need to look at this is, how can we actually look at this sector of our economy being one that continues to produce, being one that continues to produce not just for us here in California, but around the world. But we're going to have to be smarter about how we produce too, in terms of how we keep our costs down, but at the same time continue to grow our economy. Because if there's one thing I've learned throughout what's been happening over the past few months, and that is, our reliance on federal funding and our reliance on federal policies. I think there's a lot that we can do as a state ourselves to continue to uplift our economy.
What did your background as being a state controller, also under two different governors, have that separates you from other candidates in this race?
Well, I think I have the deepest fiscal and financial background. Look, I grew up managing the books for my parents' small laundry and dry cleaning business, and numbers have always been my particular passion because it really drives a lot of decisions that, at least to me, speaks to how we can be accountable, that we don't overspend, that we are using our dollars to get the best outcomes, and certainly saw that on a very personal level in terms of what my family was able to afford, but also I think about that for the state. We are a state that brings in a lot of revenue, obviously, but also have a lot of needs and challenges. And so I think my deep fiscal and financial experience will certainly help us prioritize what's important, how we can actually deliver services more effectively and efficiently to keep costs down, but also at the same time being sure that no part of the state is left behind. We do well as an economy when we know that every Californian can share in our economic prosperity.
And when you talk about no part of the state being left behind, how important is that for the Central Valley, that at times feels like it's just that area between Los Angeles and Sacramento or the Bay Area? How does making Central Valley be an important part of your campaign, be an important part of your campaign?
It's a very important part of the campaign. When I look at the Central Valley, I see a richness, certainly in terms of its economy. I mean, it's the breadbasket of the world, if you will, but it's also a place where it really harbors a lot of the ills of the state. I mean, when I look at this particular region of the valley, I'm still very high poverty rates, poor air quality. There are still disparities in terms of accessing, just the basics in terms of healthcare, quality education. And so when I look at that, and we continue to talk about how our economy continues to be a global powerhouse, and you peel that back and you realize, my goodness, I'm of the philosophy that our economic health and strength really rests on the economic health and strength of each and every Californian. And to the extent that we're not addressing these issues, I do think they become a burden for all of us. And so it's a very important part of the state in terms of its production, its attributes, but also the challenges where we do have to pay attention to how we can mitigate those for this prosperity that we can have as a state to be shared.
One of those areas that may be at odds is sometimes the air quality, but then also how the state handles oil and gas regulation. Of course, Kern County being the center for oil and gas in the state of California. Are you someone who wants to run a campaign that is focused on transitioning away from fossil fuels, or are you someone who will embrace what is here in the Central Valley? And I know that it kind of also weighs a little bit heavy with air quality and concerns like that as well.
Absolutely. I think you have to do both. Look, I think globally we are poised to really embark on a major energy transition. Certainly here in California, there's been a lot of investment already in terms of moving to a renewable economy. On the other hand, we have to be very mindful that this is not about just flipping a switch. This requires planning. It requires looking at what the impacts are going to be, the consequences of jobs being lost, what kinds of jobs will be coming in its place, other opportunities with respect to climate that could be part of a clean, renewable economy. So these conversations, I don't believe, have really occurred yet. We tend to have very ambitious goals that we want to meet as a state of California, which I support. On the other hand, how do we reach those goals? How do we make sure that communities are a part of the plan to get to those goals? And how can we be sure that as we reach those goals, that economically, that there, like I mentioned, the vision, even with the Paris Climate Accords, has always been when we have this just transition to a renewable, clean economy, that there is shared economic prosperity. And what does that look like? We don't have plans by way of just even a timeline of how we reach those goals, whether it's no gas-powered cars by 2035 or just a carbon-neutral economy by 2045. I mean, those are heavy lifts. And when you think about just how we're not even manufacturing enough cars to meet that goal, when you think about what's going to happen to businesses like car dealerships or rental car companies or those industries that rely on gas-powered vehicles, light or heavy, those are the conversations we need to have, because all of that needs to transition, and we've not really, I think, done a good job of really having those stakeholders at the table to talk about what that plan looks like. How do we reach interim targets to even get to the 2035, and what are the things that are kind of getting in the way or that are hurdles that we have to overcome to get there?
And then when it comes to another thing that we see a lot of money spent on here, another large project is HighSpeed Rail that goes through the Central Valley as well. What are your thoughts about completing that project? Do you have as lofty goals in mind, I guess, as far as setting those hard deadlines that it seems like the current administration does have, as far as the Newsom administration? What does the future look like for you?
Well, HighSpeed Rail, let me just say, look, we know about the cost overruns, we know about the delays, and certainly the additional costs it will take to just complete the current backbone leg of it from Merced to Bakersfield. I believe we should complete this. It is the backbone of the entire system. It's not the San Francisco to LA, but we need this backbone if we're going to even think about just building out the system in the future. I would like to see it completed. To me, it represents just really an opening of opportunities for new business development and housing opportunities, and I hope that we can look at this as a way to think about how we build economically and environmentally sustainable communities. And I think just looking at it from Merced to Bakersfield could be very instructive for other parts of the state.
I think one of the issues that many perceive of the project is that it just kind of looks like a lot of money going to, to something that hasn't been quite built yet. But something interesting that I found, I don't know if maybe you found this in your time with the project as well, is when you talk to the workers who are out there working, they're very proud of what they're doing.
They are very proud of it. And frankly, a lot has been invested. So if we don't complete this, we will have sunk a lot of costs and really abandon a lot of the assets under construction. And so that produces no value, frankly, over time. And I think once we get this, what I consider to be really kind of the underlying, backbone of the system built, the possibilities then can be what we want them to be in the future in terms of how we want to expand that, how we may someday realize the San Francisco to LA, route. But I think for this particular region of the state, it could be a real economic boom.
Sure. Would it be a better way, I guess, press-wise for it, and maybe this isn't where you are at the moment, but just the way of thinking about it, is to put those workers at the forefront? Because it seems like a lot of the times when we see the ribbon-cutting ceremonies, it's the governor with the CEO of the rail project, and then we're with my photographer going out and talking to the people behind the scenes, but maybe those people are maybe the most impacted, and those who want to ride it after they build it.
Absolutely, and many of those workers are from right here in this region, so they actually see the promise of what this is going to bring.
Yes, it's an interesting project. I know one of the other things that's interesting that's going on across the state right now, I think, I'm trying to figure out a way to word it, but would be the money that's spent on improving roads in California. I think there's people that have seen a lot of maybe a lack of progress as far as it goes. They always see the orange vest and they know people are working hard, especially out here during the summer. How do we go about, I guess, financially spending on roads and better infrastructure, and really seeing the progress as opposed to just seeing them constantly out and working on that?
Well, I mean, I think all of us are probably pretty vocal when our infrastructure isn't working for us, whether it's potholes or just, things that always are problematic as we look at our mobility options. And so, and also, when we think about this energy transition, we're going to have to think more smartly about how are we going to finance, our road maintenance over the future. If there's less reliance on gas-powered vehicles, gas tax revenue goes down. We haven't even begun to have that conversation yet in terms of what are the sources of revenue going to be in terms of maintaining our roads for the future. And I know other states are looking at some options. We've started to explore some options here, whether we want to put congestion pricing, models into place where, peak hours of travel that, we're actually raising revenue during those hours as almost a way to just incentivize, people getting into public transit, getting into more clean ways of mobility. So I would say that, as we talk about road maintenance, it's an economic issue from the perspective of how we move goods and people. And so I really do think we're going to have to look at it very seriously when it comes to how we move goods. Is it going to be economically feasible to continue to have, for example, large cargo trucks on the roads versus, just other ways, whether it's rail or other modes of moving goods. But these are the conversations that we're going to need to have in the future. Our ports are already involved in those conversations. I think when we look at just kind of the more traditional means of how we move goods, that conversation has to be deeper.
I know some of the railroads have several hubs that they're considering,
Yes,
BNSF,
exactly.
especially out in the desert areas on just the outside of Kern County, but also they would probably be hiring a number of Kern County workers.
Right, exactly.
I know that would remove a lot of congestion from the roadways. Are you in support of building those types of projects or near those warehouses like what we have in the southern part of Kern County?
I really do believe in having rail and public transit. It is a way to get more people, frankly, to opportunities, connecting people to opportunities. And where we've had such concentrations of, just where industries decide to, to locate. I'm also mindful, as you say, of the warehouse industry. I mean, obviously, they're looking for affordable land and areas where they can actually put down a footprint, where they can hire workers, but at the same time, how sustainable is that over the long term? And so I think having a diversified economy, how we can facilitate that with our transportation systems, how we can facilitate that in terms of our workforce issues. I mean, all of these things really are top of mind for me as I think about the economy of the future.
I know one of the other things that may be very top of mind for people across the state is homelessness.
Yes.
How do you go about solving homelessness in California? I know that we see the governor throw a lot of money towards the issue, and he's there's an accountability sense from the aspect of just seeing how those dollars are going to work,
Yes.
but maybe the overall outcome of the people that are on the street and how it's used, we don't always see the progress per se.
No, we don't.
Yeah.
We don't. And I think what we don't do is we look at the side of the ledger of where the number of people who are homeless continues to grow versus looking at what is driving people to become housing insecure. And so it's a whole multitude of factors. I think some of the factors can actually be addressed real time to where people don't slip into the spiral of becoming homeless, and then we're talking about some very long-term kinds of responses to hopefully help families get back on their feet and individuals. But we don't tend to talk about just the high cost of rental housing. We don't. I've been on a number of strike lines recently where right in the heart of UCLA Health Center, we have occupational therapists that are living in trailers because they can't afford the rent. So this is California. This is our fourth largest economy in the world. But the biggest foundational thing we have to do relative to housing costs is build more housing. Supply is so constrained, and obviously when supply is constrained, prices are go up. But at the same time, our financing for how we build, we don't have a state revenue source for affordable housing that's permanent, and I think we need to look at how we develop one of those. We have lots of units to build, a lot of demand to respond to, but then also looking at just what can we do for those who are unsheltered in terms of getting them into housing as quickly as possible, and also for those who really need additional services, how do we begin to serve them? And so there are solutions in place, but I think the dollars that have been directed towards homelessness, just around $20 billion, we've not really had a clear articulation of what the roles and responsibilities should be. Cities and counties have an outsized role because they're right in their communities, the homeless population. But in terms of how the state works in collaboration or in coordination with them, I think that conversation has been very, very lacking. And so we're not seeing the outcomes and responses that I had hoped that we would see after spending $20 billion.
What was your takeaway from the Prop 36 vote that saw right around 70% of Californians vote yes on that? And it seemed like when we were looking at the endorsements, a lot of the endorsements came from, on the Democratic side of the aisle, came from a lot of mayors and district attorneys and those affiliated with the Democratic Party in that sense. So some can't be partisan, but the state legislators really voted no. What is that disconnect, or were supportive of measures against that in their own crime bills? What does that show as far as a disconnect, maybe as it goes to solving homelessness between Sacramento and the rest of the state?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the response of Prop 36 was very much a law enforcement, kind of centered response, and that is one aspect of a response, but it's much more than that. I can't speak for individual legislators, but I will just say that I was a no on Prop 36, and the reason I voted no was because we did not have the infrastructure in place to actually implement something like this, and I did not want voters to think that once they approved it, that we would automatically have systems in place. We have not invested in our drug treatment capacity. If you're going to have felony mandated treatment, you need to have that capacity, and already counties are behind with just how people are being charged and not having the capacity to serve them. And so I just felt that this was creating another false narrative about what an appropriate response would be. I also think that there was a lot of just connecting or correlation with Prop 47, which was on a prior ballot, as it related to early release of low-level offenders. And what happened during that time, we had prison overcrowding, and so we needed to look at early release of some offenders. But what was not in place was any kind of commitment to increase community supervision, mental health services, drug treatment, and so a lot of those who were released probably weren't being served to be able to have them re-enter their communities successfully. So again, I felt like Prop 36 was creating another narrative that wasn't going to be really true about the needs that needed to be addressed and the capacity we needed to have in place. I think the law enforcement response wasn't obviously just the heightened attention to crime, being committed everywhere, the smash and grabs, the just the really kind of attention that certainly the news and the media were focusing on increased crime in different communities. But when you peel back and look at actually the numbers, not necessarily an increase in crime, but the randomness of it, and just certainly, just what was happening in just spontaneous ways in terms of businesses being robbed and all that. Serious, there should be consequences for that, but I don't think that Prop 36 was the right response.
Well, I know when you mention that issue, it seems like a number of counties didn't have the setup for the drug treatment courts, but Kern County does, and they've been they're very proud of it. What should have happened, I think, in your mind instead, or what can you fix from the governor's office to make it a more fiscally responsible act?
I think we need to fund, just the capacity building that needs to happen. Orange County, I think, is now in the thousands of cases where, they need to really look for avenues of how they're going to refer those cases to drug treatment. And so how do we build that capacity? I think that's a good relationship that the state should have with local governments about just understanding what that capacity looks like and providing some funding for that. But funding with outcomes, just what is that leading to in terms of, people really being able to have success in treatment and to be able to, re-enter their communities. I think we have to just be sure that our dollars are going towards things that are successful.
Mm-hmm. And on that issue as well, when it comes to the, well, actually I want to go back to the homelessness aspect of it, because I know that you mentioned one of the biggest issues is supply when it comes to housing, and as far as California. I think a lot of people would also argue, though, that the biggest issue could be CEQA. Is there anything you can do from the governor's office to reform, or does this have to go through somewhere else?
I think CEQA, look, it's, I think what we're coming to see, what we're seeing coming to a head is that Californians want a lot of things, and we want it today, and we don't want to pay for it. I think we all would say that that's desirable. On the other hand, we want a good quality of life in California. We really value our precious natural resources. And I think with CEQA, look, it is an impediment from the perspective that every development project that I know of has a line item for CEQA litigation. So it's already, kind of driving up costs to a development project. On the other hand, I think there are some things we can streamline with respect to the CEQA review process, such that it doesn't have to take as long. Other environmental approvals, I'm looking to do a one-stop shop with respect to how we can get all of these approvals done, so that we're looking at this holistically rather than just kind of piecemeal. That tends to take more time, and the time value of money in construction is so palpable, and so how can we actually look at streamlining that? I know there was a move afoot just to have CEQA exemptions up and down, but I'm not so sure that's the answer either, because when we do come into any kind of issue that has to be mitigated, that will drive up costs during the course of the development project. So I'd rather have the review up front, but let's do it in a streamlined way and do it in a smart way where developers don't have to just spend just years in this process to be able to continue to move their project along.
What did the LA fires and the most recent fire seasons teach you about how you would respond to fires? Because unfortunately, it seems like it's an inevitable part of California at the moment. How would you respond to disasters like that? How did this educate you on how you would?
Well, I think one of the things, that I really was struck by with the LA fires, obviously, just hearts going out to so many who lost homes. We have many friends who lost homes in Altadena and the Palisades. And what I would say about that is that California and frankly all of our governments in collaboration really need to get back to the business of preparedness. I think when we think about climate change and all of the disasters that are going to happen, whether it be a pandemic, whether it be wildfires, whether it be extreme weather events, our ability to be prepared to respond to all of that, I don't believe is at its height of what it should be. It's not optimal. We have fragmented systems. We don't have collaboration. We definitely, and I think for the average taxpayer in California, they believe they're paying property taxes, or their taxes actually go towards these services that frankly have been lacking when these disasters have happened. And so how do we get back to a place of where we've got preparedness, we've got the right people who can help us prepare disaster plans, where we're in collaboration with communities about what happens when their communities are affected, where our local leaders are working with our state leaders in terms of how we spring into action when these events happen, and where the rebuilding doesn't take a long time. Obviously in California, there are many areas of California that are prone to high risk of wildfires, but I think when we have first responders at the table, when we have our planners at the table, when we have our local government officials at the table, when we have just so many who, when we have our building standards professionals at the table, there are ways that I think we can rebuild that can be helpful in terms of hopefully reducing the risk of being subject to wildfires. But also, we're in an era now where there's so much innovation going on with respect to building materials too, that can be helpful as far as building more fire-resistant communities.
And then circling back to the Central Valley, as far as it goes with migrant farm workers, we have several that are work here in agriculture and in several other fields as well. But what would you go about handling negotiations with the Trump administration, or encouraging or discouraging policy that they may have as far as deportations, or the way that Border Patrol runs their operations in the state? How would you instruct local government as well and local sheriff's office to participate, or to perhaps not participate in immigration raids?
Well, I think in California we are operating under the rubric of SB 54. We are a sanctuary state, which means that we are not going to be aiding our federal government when it comes to mass immigration efforts. This is a federal issue. California's role in this is to protect our communities. Many of these workers, our undocumented workers, fuel so many sectors of our economy, agriculture being one, but construction, our hospitality industry. And they pay taxes. They're actually contributors to our economy. And so what I would say to the Trump administration, and I hope to be able to have our employers here in California be a part of this conversation because of how vital this workforce is for their bottom line, but to really talk about how we need really immigration reform at the federal level. There were attempts to do that in the prior administration, but now it's become much more of a punitive approach in terms of how we treat our undocumented immigrants throughout the country. But I do think that this is really the right time to push for that reform. There are pathways to immigration to becoming documented that I think can happen, but it is, bottom line, going to hurt our economy. They do work that, frankly, other workers aren't willing to do. And here in California, they've been a very, very vital part of our economy. And so I just hope our employers are able to step up. I know many are just feeling kind of the chill of this administration right now and not wanting to get in the crosshairs. But my gosh, I don't think that can last for very long before it really has some bottom line impacts.
Circling back to the final few questions here, I know with accountability seems to be the main goal of your campaign,
yes.
And perhaps accountant and controller, all those things can kind of maybe perhaps tie into one. Why is accountability so important, and why does that separate you from all these other candidates in the race that I think you're trying to beat?
Sure. Accountability I look at as really foundational to what government does, right? I mean, first and foremost, the dollars that we have to work with, the public dollars that we have to work with, aren't ours. They belong, we hold them in trust for the people of the state of California. And our role really is to how do we govern well in the way that we deploy these resources to meet the needs of Californians. And I look at this even in a broader lens, Will, and that is, we hear so much about the demise of our democracy in this country. And yet, I think about that a lot from the perspective of, why has that become the case? We know that democracies are always fragile. We just have to witness what happens to them around the world. But it's fragile here in our country, and this was really informed by the hundreds of door knocks I did in the Central Valley in the last election cycle, where people just feel like the basic government services aren't getting delivered. It could be, the trash pickup. It could be the street cleaning. It could be not getting the phone answered at the other end of a government agency. Whatever the experience is, and people are frustrated, and I get that. I understand that, because the role of government is to serve. On the other hand, I think that when I look at the demise of a democracy, the antidote to that within our reach is how do we look at governing well? And governing well means not being afraid of really inviting broader civic participation, not being afraid of being transparent about the actions that we take, not being afraid of looking at how we can best deploy our public resources through the budget process or through other processes where we are able to measure what we are getting from the deployment of those resources. Not being afraid of actually prioritizing, who we serve. The rule of law underlies everything that we do as a government, and one of the tenets of the rule of law is that we have a special eye to our vulnerable communities. And however you define those communities, because if they continue to be vulnerable, we're paying for that so much more in the long run. And then I think the most important element of good governance is accountability. It's not just accountability to the public, it's accountability to different levels, among different levels of government. And why that's important is that when things are not working, we want to pull that back and say, what can we do to be sure that we're getting the results that we want? How can we deliver for people where they see the benefit? And we tend to have a system of where we don't question how well things are working. And when you have had budget surpluses, you tend definitely not to do that, because you keep funding new things and you keep funding the things that have traditionally been funded, rather than just pulling back and saying, okay, where are our needs? Let's invite that public participation to help us prioritize what those needs are. Let's measure what we're actually getting from the expenditure of our funds. And when we have this accountability, which, by the way, is a tone that's set from the top, it's set by the governor. It's an expectation that you put on the legislature. It's an expectation that you put on our local governments that we work in collaboration with. It's an expectation we put on the public. And when I talk about inviting strict accountability, it's something we should not be afraid of. Like, I was mentored in the old school of governance where accountability and transparency are your friends. And if we're afraid of it, shame on us. because it says to me that we're not doing our job in the best interests of the people. And so to be accountable is just understanding that it's not about throwing somebody under the bus. It's about how do we do better with the resources that we have been entrusted with to get the outcomes that are going to benefit people's lives.
How is your campaign impacted by the pending likelihood of a vice president deciding to jump into the race? How does she shake up the race for you?
I think the race is wide open, and so I will be staying in the race regardless of who's in it. For me, it is about the skill set that we've talked about. Our early polling, and certainly as I'm having conversations around the state through fireside chats and town halls, people just want things to work in their lives. They want a government where they know that the things that they count on can be delivered. They want government to deliver differently. I believe that I have that skill set, certainly with my fiscal background and financial background, and that actually did rise above all other attributes in the poll that we did early on before I entered the race. But even having said that, as I travel the state now and what people really are dissatisfied with, it is this disconnect, right? This disconnect from what government is doing, and yet they're feeling, just all of the impacts of just things not being, not having, things not working. So after I termed out as controller in January 2023, traveled the state extensively, meeting with almost 200 different community leaders around the state. And regardless of income level, regardless of political party, regardless of just where they live in this state, the one thing that was the most palpable that I walked away from each of these meetings feeling was just the sentiment expressed to me that people don't feel that deeply tethered about being here in California for the long term. And a lot of that has to do with affordability, either themselves or for their children. And I just, as a native Californian, and I'm not ready to give up on this state yet, it just really hit me hard that I thought, my goodness, what could the state become if we lose all this talent? What kinds of industries are we really going to be able to attract? How's the world going to look to us as they have in the past as the home of innovation when we are not able to have that talent here in California? And so it is really the work that we have to do in terms of how we continue to have California continue to be an economic powerhouse, but an economic powerhouse where Californians are actually a big part of our success. And so regardless of who's in the race, that will continue to be my focus, and the engagement that I have with voters in terms of how we're running this campaign really has been just so instrumental in terms of how I'm forming my policy priorities. And so when we talk about affordability, we're going to lean in on housing affordability, and lean in on healthcare affordability, and certainly on electricity.
Well, let's close out on your background as a native Californian. You've talked a little bit about handling family finances for your family business. Yes. What does California mean to you in your background, and of course just coming up in the Bay Area as well? And I'm sure that holds a special place in your heart.
Yes. Well, I am a native San Franciscan, but I am very proud to be in the state of California. We have so much in terms of positive attributes, and yet when things aren't working, I think we tend to just really not value what we have here, but we really do have a lot to work with. Our people, the diversity here is really the envy of so many around the world, and we could be doing business with anyone around the world. When I look at the beautiful natural attributes that we have here in California, no other place like it. I've traveled the world, and to be able to come back to a beautiful state like California, again, just things that I think a lot of people want to be a part of in terms of living in a beautiful state. But I also think for me, what I have confidence in is that not only do we have the talent here, but we are always at the cutting edge. And so how do we look at solving so many of the problems that are here with us, but also on the horizon with the talent that we have here, making the investments here, creating microeconomies around the state that actually can help different areas of the state continue to grow and uplift themselves for their own economic resilience. And this is the work. This is the work and the role of government. It's how we look at bringing these opportunities and how we can ensure that economic mobility is possible for everyone without having to leave the state of California. And so I'm just really just grateful for the opportunities that I've had, certainly as a daughter of immigrants here in California, that my story is not that different from so many who are looking to really attain, that kind of success throughout the state today.
Well, thank you so much for coming in. We appreciate your time and getting a chance to see Bakersfield once again.
Thank you, Will. It's a pleasure to be here.